Hi, my name is Phil. I like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss what may be one of the last chapters in the Dominic Cummings scandal, for now, at any rate. Durham Police have concluded that Dominic Cummings should not have travelled to Barnard Castle. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. Now, the first thing that needs to be noted here is that it is ultimately a court that determines whether an action is unlawful or not when there is serious doubt, that is. So the police clearing someone doesn't mean that they were definitely not breaking the law, and declaring them guilty does not automatically make them so either, which is why they don't do that. So for a definitive legal conclusion, Cummings would have had to go to court. However, he's not going to. But what Durham Police have said about Cummings' naughtiness is as follows. First of all, they are satisfied that there's no evidence that he did break the law in travelling to Durham and staying at his father's property. Now, it was a breach of government advice, they've said. So he did break the rules that he himself, bear in mind, was involved in compiling. Hence why it's rank hypocrisy for him to deny any wrongdoing. However, there is a distinction between what the government advise and what the law insists. This distinction has been very confusing for us, given that the government have not been open and honest or even consistent in communicating these things. Now, like I said, just because the police don't consider that a breach doesn't mean it wasn't. It's just that based on the information that they have and that they can prove, it wasn't, in their professional opinion, a breach of the law. However, given that other legal experts considered that there's room for doubt on this point, I'm happy to call that one a day. Except, of course, there was a Freedom of Information request to Durham Police that did reveal that they had fined people on 2 occasions, specifically for driving to Durham from London at round about the same time that Dominic Cummings did. This is perhaps where the reasoning comes into it. But still, Durham Police did suggest that they do not issue fines for people in the first instance. Their practice, and remember this can vary from force to force, but Durham Police's practice is to tell people to correct their behaviour when they are found to be in breach of the coronavirus regulations, and they only issue fines, they say, if those people choose not to correct their naughtiness. So perhaps the 2 people, or the 2 groups of people that were fined, were not impressed with being told to bog off back to London. But given that Cummings' reasoning was invalidated by his own statement at his own press conference, I still think there should be a little bit of legal debate over this one. However, I'm fine with that. 2, Durham Police said that the trip to Barnard Castle was likely a breach of the regulations. That is an unlawful act. He broke the law, albeit not a serious criminal offence. They further added that had an officer been present at the time, they would have told Cummings to drive back to his home. This is crucial. We'll get through this. In other words, he shouldn't have made the journey, and the police would have sought to prevent such a journey had they known about it at the time. Curiously, they made no mention of his apparent admission of a breach of Section 96 of the Road Traffic Act at the coronavirus, rather than the coronavirus regulations. They focused entirely on whether or not he breached any part of the coronavirus regulations, not other laws. They also said they would take no further action, as they have not taken retrospective action in any other cases, and they didn't want to treat him any differently to anyone else, and there was no proof that he'd broken social distancing rules, which is fair enough as far as I'm concerned. There are some legal experts who are saying, hang on a minute, but if that's their practice, then they are at least being consistent with that practice. Now, bear in mind that the offence only carries what would have been a minor penalty for someone as wealthy as Cummings anyway. It was a £60 fine, for goodness sake. But it does mean that he cannot continue to say that his actions were justified unless he wants to go to court to challenge Durham Police's views on the matter. Naturally, a judge can overrule the police on this should there be a case brought before them, but like I say, this isn't going to happen. It's not in the public interest to take him to court, like it wouldn't be in the public interest to take anyone to court in the same circumstances, as there's no evidence he's repeated his offence, and the offence is a minor one that would at worst attract a fine. and Cummings is not desperate enough to clear his name to bring a case against the police. Now, some people may, and indeed are, and indeed some sections of the media are seizing upon the statement that said he might have committed a minor breach. They are taking that to mean the police aren't sure. So they're just clearing him because we don't know. We haven't got enough information. That's not the case. That is not what the statement says. But you may reasonably suppose that this is the police saying that they aren't sure. Understand that. You're not being stupid. The reason for the might is because few things. First of all, they only have Dominic Cummings' statement for his reasons in going. Remember, it's not unlawful in itself at the time to have driven to Barnard Castle. It all depends upon the reasons for doing so. But he may have been lying about the reasons for doing so. Not convinced? Don't blame you. The key is this. This is the real key. The police said that had they been there at the time, an officer would have directed him to drive back. They made it clear that they would have stopped him making that journey had they known about it at the time. So had they been there at the start of the journey, let's say they just happened to be passing as he drove out of his father's home where he was staying, and asked, where are you going? Barnard Castle. For what reason? To test I'm not blind. They'd have told him, turn around, son. Now, the police are only permitted to act in this way according to Section 8 of the coronavirus regulations if an offence has been committed. This is the crucial bit that a lot of people understandably missed out. The simple fact of the matter is the police have said that they would have turned him around, and in doing so have said because he's committed an offence, assuming that he used the same story on the police at the time that he did on the Nation on Monday evening. They don't say they might have turned him round. They say they would have, unequivocally. In addition, as I alluded to at the beginning of the video, police are not allowed to determine guilt or otherwise regarding breaches of the law. Only a court can do that. The police are simply not permitted to say that a person has unequivocally broken the law without a court verdict backing that up. It's the same as a court in England and Wales, for example, saying not guilty when you're acquitted. Then they can't say you're innocent. They don't know that. There's not enough evidence that you're guilty, or not proven in Scotland. It's a precise form of legal wording designed to avoid confusion, but in reality can cause confusion to those not familiar with legal statements. And it might be that the statement is poorly worded specifically. There have been accusations, in fact, because it is poor wording, that it's been written in conjunction with the government to allow them to try and carry on fooling the public. The police cannot clear him because he was guilty of an offence, albeit a minor offence, but an offence under the regulations he helped draft. And the police are independent. They can't be lent on to breaking point by the government, but they can be lent on a little bit. And so obviously they saw no gain in making it worse for government ministers who've told us all that his behaviour was perfectly legal, when of course it was not. There are subtleties in the law and in reports on legal affairs, which is why it is meritorious in following those who are well versed in such things. David Allen Green, in this case, has been widely praised for his reporting on matters. Now, I will say there is a link to a great video he did on the community tab of this channel. If you'd like to see it, I'll also put it in description below as well. It is honestly well worth the watch if you've got half an hour spare or so. So where does this leave us? Obviously, the government have decided to tough it out and keep faith with Cummings. That means Cummings is going to remain in place for the foreseeable future, in all likelihood. Any likelihood of him going was always going to depend on backbench Tory MPs. The government don't have to care that much about what the public think at the moment if they think they can turn the public's attitude around in 4.5 years. They've got a large majority in Parliament. Ultimately, it needed about 50 MPs in Parliament to get rid of him. And they look like they're ready to draw a line under it as long as they don't take personal flack. But I can talk more about that in another video. I can also talk about that with more confidence next week when Parliament returns. I expect, however, for Cummings to remain in place now. But in general terms, this is where we are. Boris Johnson and senior members of the government were this week unable to answer questions about the distinction between government advice, which you are not legally obliged to follow, but you should, and the law, which you are. This is because they knew that Cummings had broken the law but insisted that he had not, which meant them completely incapable of answering that question. Note that nobody was suggesting that Cummings had broken the law in a truly dreadful way, just that he had and should acknowledge that he had and apologise for it. We're not trying to say he was sacrificing virgins by the light of the moon or anything. Insert quip about random locality not having any anyway. So the police have spoken. Cummings did not follow government advice and did commit an offence. The government and Cummings have said that he did not, and they are now contradicting the police, and they're not just contradicting what the police have said beforehand but since. Now, when responding to the statement by Durham Police, it was reported that the Prime Minister thought he'd behaved legally, and that was that. This is ultimately where we are now. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.